From Sarai to Sarah, a journey of faith. Often, when things are going the easiest is when we trip up the most. Temptations we struggle with don't only trip us up when we're down. Welcome back to Hebrews 4 Ministries Weekly Inspirations. My name is Keegan Harkins, and today we're finishing up our lesson From Sarai to Sarah, a journey of faith. We talked about the struggles that Sarah faced and how she doubted God as well as her own abilities while she was waiting for the fulfillment of God's promise. Today we're going to be talking about how sometimes when everything is going our way, we actually get tripped up more than when we struggle. We don't normally think about times of success and prosperity as being times of temptation in our lives, but often when things are going the easiest is when we trip up the most. And I think that that's because when we're in the midst of a struggle, we very easily understand and recognize that we desperately need God. And as our dependence on God deepens, we draw closer to Him. We pray more. We tend to search the scriptures for advice and encouragement more. And all of these things keep God foremost on our minds. But when times are good and easy, we can become complacent. And I hate to see it, but maybe even lazy in our spiritual walk. So we can go about the day-to-day routine of our lives, and that may even include doing daily devotionals and praying, but that desperation to be close to God can fade if we let it. And when we're in a spiritual daze, when we're just going through the motions of our Christianity, that is when something very little can completely knock us off our feet. And sometimes we fall when things are relatively peaceful in our lives, and that fall can be more devastating than when we trip on temptation during times of struggle, and probably because it catches us the most off guard. So here again, we can see in Sarah's life. We're picking up with her story in Genesis 21, verses 1 and 2, which says, "Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him." So, as you can imagine, Sarah is feeling pretty great. In fact, in verse 6, it says that Sarah said, "God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me." You would think that this joy would ease her fear, her doubt, and her insecurities, but here we have the height of a celebration. God had given her a child, and even though she had passed spring chicken by a lot of years, she's now a mother. And Isaac's birth was obviously a miracle, definitely a joyous occasion, and you would think that Sarah would be on such an emotional high that she wouldn't have time for all of those old insecurities and doubts to come and snare her up. But the temptations we struggle with don't only trip us up when we're down. They can be a danger to us at any time, more so when we least expect it. And that's what happens with Sarah. So Isaac grew, and the Bible tells us that on the day he was weaned, Abraham threw this big party. So we can picture Isaac being this little toddler, 2 or 3, kind of stumbling around, and Sarah beaming with pride. And she was no doubt settled into being a mom and enjoying this new life and this new aspect of her family now that she has one. And she's gotten into the groove and routine of her life. Things are calm. They've settled into a land that King Abimelech had given them. Things are running pretty smoothly. And then she looks over at Ishmael, the teenage son of her servant Hagar and Abraham. And the Bible tells us that Ishmael was mocking. Now, this word in Hebrew, it's kind of ambiguous because it means to laugh in merriment and having fun, but it also means laughing in scorn or making fun of someone. So we're not really sure if Ishmael was playing with Isaac or if he was teasing him. Either way, whatever it was, it totally sets Sarah off, and immediately her joy turns into red-hot anger. Genesis 21:10 says, "And she said to Abraham, 'Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that slave woman's son will never share an inheritance with my son Isaac.'" There is a lot of anger and a lot of jealousy hidden in those words. If you remember back in chapter 16, we read that it was Sarah's idea for Abraham to try and have a child with Hagar in the first place. Verse 3 says, "Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian maidservant Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife." See, those ideas that we have when we're relying on ourselves instead of God, they can really come back and bite us later on. And Sarah is so insanely jealous of Hagar and Ishmael, and yet the entire situation is her own fault. It was her idea in the first place. And I think that the lesson there is that sometimes when things are going good for us, it doesn't take much for us to forget that God has everything in control. God had just proven to her that he was more than capable of doing miraculous things, and she is still trying to manipulate circumstances to ensure God's promise is fulfilled. Now, long about now, you're probably wondering why we're studying Sarah and how she can possibly be an example to us. Well, in his article, Sarah, Hoping Against Hope, John MacArthur comments, "Sarah's faults are obvious enough. She was certainly fallen. Her faith at times grew weak. Her own heart sometimes led her astray. If those things were all we knew about Sarah, we might be tempted to picture her as something of a battle axe, a harsh, severe woman. Fortunately, there was much more to Sarah than that. Sarah's life on the whole was actually characterized by humility, meekness, hospitality, faithfulness, deep affection for her husband, sincere love towards God, and hope that never died." There's a lot about Sarah's life that we haven't talked about. And there's a lot about Sarah's life that the Bible really only hints or mentions in passing. See, her failures are right out there for everybody to see, a lot like ours are. Sometimes I think that everyone can see all the times that I trip or I stumble or I blunder, but the times when I'm being good and the times that I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to do, nobody notices. And Sarah probably felt the same way. If she could look down from heaven and see all the things that we talk about her and the things that are mentioned and associated with her the most, I'm sure she's up there going, "I did a lot of good stuff too." And I think that we can identify with her in that as well. Sometimes we miss the fact that she never complained when her husband came home one day and said, "Pack up, honey, we're moving. And oh, by the way, I don't know where we're going. We're just going to wander around until God tells us that we're there." She never complained, and I don't know how many of us can say the same. Or how about all the times that she remained faithful and obedient to her husband when he asked her to tell people that she was his sister? Her weaknesses are definitely easy to see, and ours are too. But her strengths were equally easy to see if you can put yourself in her shoes. She was humble and obedient to her husband and to God as they wandered through life. She had to trust that God would take care of them. Sarah doubted. Sarah sinned. She wasn't perfect. She was human, just like me and you. And I think that Sarah's story is one of a great encouragement. We see that she goes back and forth between faith and doubt, strength and weakness, just like we do. And when we look at her life from beginning to end, we can see a very strong woman who had a lot of wonderful qualities and some pretty major flaws. But despite all of this, the Bible records her as one of the greats of our faith and an example to all Christian women. So if God can use Sarah, don't you think he can use me and you? See, the next time we doubt or we fly off the handle and act irrationally, not that any of us would ever do such a thing, but just in case, well, I hope that Sarah pops into our minds and we can remember that whatever rash decisions that we make today are going to still be with us in the future, just like Sarah and Hagar and Ishmael. The things we do today affects our tomorrow. Will God use us even if we screw up? Of course He will. The forgiveness of the cross covers over every sin, every failure. God can use our triumphs and our trials to help encourage people that come after us, but we want to make sure we're leaving a legacy of humility, faith, and obedience for others to follow. God will forgive us, but we should still try our best. So I hope that there's something about Sarah's life that just really spoke to you that you can take with you. And as you're going about your life and you struggle, I hope that you'll remember that just like Sarah, God can use us even though we mess up, even though we do things that maybe we regret. I'd like to think that at some point Sarah looked back at her treatment of Hagar and Ishmael and regretted it. And I know that there are things in our life that we look back on and think, I wish I had turned left instead of turned right. But the wonderful thing about Sarah's example, her story, is that God looks really truly at the inside of our hearts. Sometimes our actions don't always portray our faith and our dependence on God. But we gotta keep trying. We have to keep laying it all at the cross and saying, wow, I screwed up this time. God, help me try again. And then taking advantage of that next opportunity. Sarah could have completely given up, but she kept picking herself up. She kept trying to be the person that she knew God wanted her to be. And I think that that's an example that all of us can really walk away from and remember and try and be like her. So I hope that you've enjoyed your look into the journey and life of Sarah. If you want to read her entire story, as much as we know about her, it can be found in Genesis chapters 12 through 23. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. Again, my name is Keegan Harkins, and this has been Weekly Inspirations. You can find the other 2 lessons in this series, as well as other free lessons, worksheets, podcasts, and videos from a number of wonderful teachers by visiting us at www.hebrews4ministries.com. I'd also like to encourage you to check out our Facebook page. We have 2 of them that I'd like you to check out if you get a moment. One is Coloring Through the Bible, so facebook.com/Coloring Through the Bible. They're daily devotionals that will encourage you and uplift you. And then the other one is livingforlater.com. And there's lots of more encouragement that can be found there and tools to help you grow closer to God and focus on where we're going. So thank you for joining me today. From all of us here at Hebrews 4 Ministries, have a truly blessed day.